evening today to our choice event. Typically we start around lunchtime from 1 to 2 with our choice events. But today we have a special guest who's joining us from the US. So we thought we make it possible for him to join not during the night, but at least after breakfast. And in a bit, I will invite him on stage to talk about how to engage suppliers for renewable energies. But before we start with that, I give you a quick tour through this webinar. So, my name is Lara. I'm one of the co-founders of the Climate Choice, and we do our choice events to really invite experts and share best practices all around decarbonization, specifically of supply chains. And for everyone who hasn't joined so far, this is how you can participate, even though you can just see me and I don't see you. There is a chat, and I very much encourage you to participate by sharing your thoughts and questions in the chat. So either you see it on the bottom or on top, and you can directly start by putting in your name and from where you are joining today. So in my case, that would be Lara, and I'm joining for you from Berlin. And I wait until the first person dares to share from where she or he is joining. And there's a red sign, Nina from Hamel, near to Hanover. Thanks for that explanation. And now we have Sylvia from London. And probably there are more coming in. Amazing. Now you have seen how it works. And I very much invite you to put all the questions for the webinar in that chat. I will check it, and in the end, we take it for our Q&A sessions. But for sure, you can also use it to share your own experiences, comments to whatever is shared during the webinar, maybe also some links or resources, so really benefit from that time and that you can interact with each other. So normally someone is sitting on front on the panel, you cannot talk while that is happening, but here you can directly get in touch. And also afterwards, we very much invite you to join our Slack community. So in your email registration, you got that link. So if you want to join afterwards, you can participate there and stay connected and learn what's going on in the choice events. And a last sentence also for the climate choice. Why we do these choice events is because we work on the decarbonization of the supply chain. We offer our climate intelligence platform to really gather, analyze and manage climate relevant data of your suppliers and work towards reducing emissions. And we see that there are just so many hurdles that a company cannot necessarily overcome by itself. We really all need to work together. We need to work with our customers, suppliers, all kind of stakeholders. And that's why we also really benefit here from bringing in experts and sharing knowledge. And that's what we also do in our Scope 3 action group. And I'm super excited to share that we will have a second time the community starting next year. So we have launched it just this year in summer after our climate summit, because so many people have asked us how they can really work together, stay connected, and tackle that challenge of Scope 3 decarbonization. And in that group, it's the first time the unique support that we really guide companies through that challenge of gathering information from their suppliers, integrated in their systems and finding a roadmap how to work together with that information and their suppliers towards decarbonization. And this year we did it already with 14 companies from different industries and sizes. And now you can apply to be a part of the batch for next year, starting in March. You find all information on our website, theclimatechoice.com, or you are very quick and can scan here this code, and then you also find all the information. But having said that, I already see that now I feel a lot of people are already online, so you didn't miss anything. And I will soon invite my both experts. But before I do that, I have a second time the opportunity for you to become active here. So you should have now a question on your screen. And yeah, you can just quickly share where you stand in terms of engaging suppliers for climate. So have you already starting to do so? Either no, or we are planning to do so, or we just started and we start with gathering data. Or yes, and we have already a structured system that might include more than gathering data. And yeah, there's also the option you are not sure, you're just not working in that area, or others. And if it's others, you can also share in the chat what it is, what we haven't thought of before. Yeah, and I see not all of you, but most have answered. And I'm gonna share the result. So you should see it also on your screen. 38% have actually started already to gather data. So I feel that's an amazing amount of people. And then 29% are planning to do so, and 10% haven't started yet. And I have a second question for you. So I think you should see it right now. No. Now you should see it. Perfect. Yeah, that was my concentrated face again. So do you ask your suppliers to buy renewable energies already? So that will be the topic of today in our webinar. Either no, or we are planning to do so, or we are still piloting it with a few suppliers, or yes, we are rolling it out, it's going great. And then you definitely comment later and share more of your knowledge. Or you are not sure, or again, others. And this time you were very quick in answering. And I share the result, which is again 38%. If I remember it, it's exactly the same thing, but this time we are planning to do so. And 21% are in the piloting phase. And yeah, 4% even, yes, it's going great. So looks like we have a few experts here whom I very much invite to share knowledge. Yeah, and with that, I would invite my both experts, Yasha and Josh, on stage. Hello, I see Yasha already, and Josh, you can join as well. Perfect. For you, good morning. I already shared. From where are you joining today?
From Oakland, California, in the San Francisco area.
Okay, and did you already had your breakfast, or will that have to wait?
I did. I have children, so I've already been up for hours.
Okay, good. Then I don't feel so bad. And yeah, Yasha, on the other hand, you probably already had a full day.
Yes.
Or where are you joining?
Looking forward to dinner, and yeah, no, joining from Berlin, and yeah, really happy to be here.
Great, then I can stop talking. I did the introduction. I hope, Josh, that gave you a good overview of who's joining today. Is that what you expected?
You know, it's really helpful. It is more or less what I expected, and I love what you said, Laura, about the one person who said yes, it's going great on renewables. I would love, really, legitimately love for them to speak up and say kind of what is working in the chat. That would be really helpful. But also good to know a lot of people are earlier in their journey, so we'll have some, I think, some helpful content today.
Great. So that gives me the cue. I would look into the chat and follow what's going on there. And Josh, I would invite you to share your slides. Yasha, you are the one afterwards. And if everything looks good, then we are excited to follow what you can share. Yes. Can go on full screen.
Look good?
That looks good. Yes, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Laura and Yasha. Thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be with this group. I know there are some just really people at the top of their game in this group. So I'm happy to be among my people, among people who are working on climate and renewables. And really, this is going to work best if there are questions. So so please don't be shy. Ask questions. Look forward to. I think we'll do Q&A toward the end. But please drop questions in the chat. So a little bit about me. my background is last number of years launching Scope 3 programs at Apple and Meta. And sorry, when I say Scope 3, I mean supplier climate programs at Apple and Meta. And currently I'm an independent consultant and do a lot of work with the Clean Energy Buyers Association, which is really a US association, but its members include some of the world's largest companies like Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, et cetera. And we just launched something called the Clean Energy Procurement Academy, which is a training vehicle for the supply chains of those companies. And we're training those companies, suppliers, starting in China, but across East Asia to buy renewable energy. So this topic is close to my heart. I also spent some years at PG&E, which is California's largest utility. So always helpful to know how things work inside of utilities. Put my email up here, feel free to reach out. So we're going to spend, I don't know, 20 to 30 minutes going through this, and hopefully this is helpful to you, and then I'll pass it over to Yasha. The main focus today is going to be on how to get suppliers to move on renewable energy. Renewable energy is the single most important lever when decarbonizing supply chains. And so it's important to at least know the basics, and I'll also refer you to some resources if you want to learn more. Actually, no pun intended, because resource, the word source, in Europe is probably one of the best places to start. I don't think I have to tell you all the story of why climate. I'm sure everybody knows this, but I think it's important to start these kind of meetings with just a reminder that we've got some hard work ahead of us, and we have an achievable goal, right? So if you look at this chart out to 2050, in order to get on a 1.5C pathway, we need to make very, very, very significant changes yesterday. So just a reminder that this is urgent work, and I'm so glad that talented folks like you are doing it, but also that it's not something that we can sort of take our time on, and we need to look for the most impactful points of intervention. And I firmly believe that Scope 3 is that place. So when I was at Apple, we were really focused on the electricity footprint within manufacturing, because as you can see here from this is from Apple's environment report, 65% of Apple's carbon footprint is from product manufacturing. I can't go into the numbers because it's confidential, but a very, very significant portion of that 65% comes from electricity at manufacturing sites. And so that's just what we call the prize. Like, that's just really the most important point of impact. It's also worth noting that companies like Apple are considering, product use as a significant part of their Scope 3 of their carbon footprint. Not all companies have kind of gotten there yet. So if they did not have that 24% of product use Scope 3, then this 65% number would be a lot bigger. So when you look at a company's carbon footprint, see if they're listing product use in it, because not all companies have gotten there yet. And again, I think the people who are on this call understand how important Scope 3 is, because that's so much of what the climate choice is about. But I just want to illustrate that that's just, if you're not aware of it, Scope 3 is really where the good stuff is hidden. That's where the real climate reductions are hidden. It's a topic I'm passionate about. I should have said in my introduction that I serve as an advisor to the climate choice. And it's precisely it's not because they're sending me piles of money. It's because I'm passionate about Scope 3, and I think that they have a really exciting approach to decarbonizing it. So this also gives you a sense for, not all Scope 3s are the same, right? So a utilities Scope 3 has a lot less opportunity for decarbonization than, for example, an industrial company. So the supplier engagement process, it looks like some of you have embarked on this journey. It's going well for some of you. Some of you have not yet embarked on it, but I just want to walk through sort of like the typical steps along that journey. And forgive me, this is not the most graphic of slides, but I just wanted to get the idea across, and appreciate that for some of you, English is not your first language. So thank you for bearing with me doing the presentation in English. But I wanted to have some of the content on the slide for you to read. So the first step, of course, is just wrapping your arm around the data. And this is just is a much bigger deal, I think, than most people realize. people start out with sort of sometimes doing like an estimate, you know, sort of a guess at what the emissions are. But in order to be taken seriously by regulators and by the companies that will audit your statements, you're going to need to have some sort of firsthand data, and starting to gather that data is really difficult. Now, you know, GHG emissions data is increasingly available, and I think, you know, so a lot of companies publish it. Climate Choice does a great job of scraping and collecting that data. Some companies don't publish it, particularly smaller suppliers, and so working with those suppliers to get that data can be very, very painful, and it's really helpful to develop a smooth process there. Getting specific electricity use and renewable energy use out of suppliers also takes a lot of work. And I want to point out that, like, in this process, hopefully you're already engaging your supplier organization, so your procurement organization, so that it's not just like sort of a sustainability person off to the side trying to collect all this, but you're building this data collection into all of the interactions with suppliers. And then, you know, having some sort of verifiable data on electricity use and renewable energy is also really important. So ideally, they're sending you a certificate or at a minimum a screenshot from their solar, you know, collection software. And moving, the second step is coming to some sort of agreement, saying, hey, we want you suppliers to use renewable energy for our production, and just setting that out very clearly. That could be in one-on-one kind of bilateral agreements. I've seen that in some cases. I've also seen, I think the sort of the gold standard is to just revise your code of conduct. Ideally, you go into your code of conduct and it says, if you want to be a supplier to our company, you have to use renewable energy in production related to our company. I think that's kind of what works the best, but it can take a little time to get there. I understand it at most companies because of, you know, politics and procurement executives being a little bit nervous about making code of conduct changes. But I think that's the goal eventually. And then at the maturity stage, reporting is a really big deal. So you don't just make these agreements and just assume they're going to go well, right? You have to be able to manage the agreement and make sure that suppliers are complying. And that's really hard. And the only way to do that is to have a great process, maybe some great software, and also to build reporting into all the procurement processes. So, you know, I've seen, for example, I think in the best case, when new people are coming into the procurement organization, they take a training on how to get climate data and energy data from suppliers. And the last two pieces are also very close to my heart. So, a lot of these suppliers, you go sort of knock on their door and say, we want you to buy renewable energy. And they say, okay, we want to make you happy, but we don't know what that means. And so it's really important to train them. And this is not me pitching the academy, the Clean Energy Procurement Academy that we just launched about a month ago. But it is just to say that I've had the experience that it's really, really impactful to get those suppliers in a room, train them what you mean when you say, we want you to buy renewable energy. And then the last piece, engaging on policy. You know, none of us are going to be able to accomplish our goals if policy doesn't change. And so, for example, I was part of launching the Asia Clean Energy Coalition, which is kind of a policy advocacy group focused on Asia to support, you know, companies that have Asian supply chains. Because, for example, in South Korea, up until maybe 2 years ago, there was no way for a company to buy renewable energy. There was no such thing as a PPA. No such thing as a green rate from the utility. It just didn't exist. And so we advocated to have that changed. So sorry, a lot there on this slide. I'm gonna I see we have a question in the Q&A. Oh, I see a note from Isabel in the Q&A. I'll keep going. So you've decided that you want to make a change in your scope 3. You see that scope 3 is the most important, impactful way to make change. You've got a few levers, right? Obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious to everyone, but energy practitioners know that you start with renewable energy. It always has the best payback. It always has the best economics. That's absolutely where you should start. And just let's go clockwise around the square here. Circular design is also really exciting. So, for example, if you can use recycled aluminum in a product, rather than primary aluminum, which primary aluminum has a very heavy carbon footprint because of mining and processing. If you can use recycled materials, then you automatically lower your carbon footprint. So that's a really exciting opportunity. I just talked about policy advocacy. Again, some people have called that scope 4. You know, what is your company's political footprint? We don't need to get into politics too much here, but you know, I feel that companies should be speaking up on climate policy, if anything, for business reasons, because, you know, we need to be able to have some say. You know, companies need to be able to have some say in the future of how climate policy plays out, and that we have the right levers available to us to succeed. And then finally, renewable energy. And hopefully I've made the case that renewable energy is a very, very significant lever. This is a bit of a rough number, but I recently talked to the CEO of SIBA about this topic, and he's a veteran. He was a CSO for two significant companies in the US. And his sort of assessment is that roughly 3/4 of the reduction potential, the GHG reduction potential from a company comes from renewable energy. And that's assuming that they've electrified as many processes as possible. So for example, heat processes are electrified, et cetera. But renewable energy, I just want to make the case that renewable energy is absolutely the most important lever in decarbonizing. So, and I'm not alone. People have gotten the message. This is data from Bloomberg showing the growth in corporate power purchase agreements, PPAs for short. I understand that PPA rules are a little different in Europe, and many of you are joining from Europe, but they are changing. And you do see significant growth in PPAs in EMEA, of course, here as well. In the US, in the last year, 70% of the new renewable energy capacity that was brought online was the result of corporate voluntary purchases. So companies have realized how important renewable energy is in decarbonizing, and they have deployed a ton of capital to get there. So here on the right, we see that bar is almost 37 gigawatts of capacity. So billions and billions of dollars going into this from, you know, in many cases, the largest companies in the world. So businesses have gotten the message that renewable energy is a really important lever for decarbonization. So what does that look like? Let's spend a little time sort of talking about this in specifics. And if you want to really dive deep, again, I would send you to Resource Platform, to Clean Energy Buyers Association. Both have a lot of great materials on their websites, and they have conferences and places to learn more. And I'm happy to connect also after this as a consultant, if that's helpful. So the first place companies start often is with on-site. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a supplier. Like I had a supplier, one that stands out. We asked them to buy renewable energy for us. They came back, they were like, all right, let us do some analysis. They came back and they said, okay, it's going to cost us, and this was not a huge company. They said it's going to cost us $500 million to do this. And it was because they had done the analysis and basically wanted to cover as many rooftops at factories all over the world as possible with solar panels. And so we had to kind of rewind and say, okay, I'm glad that you want to do rooftop solar on-site renewable energy, but that's only typically a relatively small percentage of load. So typically for an industrial facility, the electricity you can get from your rooftop, it only covers like 1 to say 10% of your load. Now that's meaningful if, for example, you have a supply chain renewable energy program and you're going out to companies and saying, we want you to purchase renewable energy on behalf of our production. And if you only are 3% of their production, well, then they can put some solar panels on the rooftop and allocate the credits to you, and you've solved the problem. So, it can be a really important lever, and it's a great place to start on-site renewable energy, but it's usually not the whole picture. But I will say usually the economics are quite good. So often paybacks in the range of 5 to 8 years. So absolutely encourage you to look at on-site. Also, employees love to show up to a workplace that has solar panels on the roof. Local politicians love to go to the ribbon cutting. So there are a lot of reasons to do rooftop solar besides just the simple economics. The next piece is direct off-site purchases. So here you see a wind farm in my home state of Texas, which, as an aside, I've seen incredible climate progress happen just in my lifetime. I started working in renewable energy in Texas in the year 2000. And then when you told people you wanted to work on renewable energy, they laughed at you. And now nobody's laughing anymore because there's something like 30 gigawatts of wind in Texas, just an incredible fleet. It's got the most wind of, or the most renewable energy of any state in the United States. And it's historically, you may know, an oil and gas state. So, this stuff can happen really fast, is my point. So for offsite purchases, that's where the really big volumes come from. So if you're saying I've got a factory, the load of that factory is, typical load is 200 megawatts or something in that neighborhood, then that's when you start to think about offsite purchases. And again, I know that the rules in Europe in the past was not as easy to do offsite purchases. It's getting easier. The reasons to do offsite purchases, rather than buy certificates, and we'll talk about certificates, are two. First, the economics. So when you do an offsite purchase, typically you lock in a price that's either flat or just escalates a little bit over time. And the benefit of that, of course, as you may know, having lived through, unfortunately, times of war in Europe, that natural gas prices do a lot of this. There's a lot of volatility in natural gas prices and hence electricity prices. And so these direct offsite purchase agreements are a hedge against that volatility. And they're also a hedge against prices that could go up very rapidly. So that's the first reason, just simple economics. The second reason is that the stakeholders that are looking at our renewable energy programs, so I'm thinking here of primarily NGOs, but in some cases governments, want to see that we're doing projects that are additional. And so doing signing up as the off-taker, as the buyer of electricity from a project, sends a very clear signal that that project is going to survive economically and enables that project to get built and get off the ground. So being that off-taker, by being that off-taker, you're enabling projects to actually happen. And that's what we call additionality. That leads to a strong additionality claim, which the NGOs and government want to see. And then the last piece is certificates. And I know in Europe, historically, buying guarantees of origin, GOs, has been sort of like the easiest way to move forward. We're starting to see, I'm sure you're watching the news, backlash against certificates, both carbon credits and renewable energy certificates. I'm a strong believer that there is a spectrum of quality of certificates. So there are, in some cases, very bad certificates that are, for example, I'm of the opinion that a certificate from a project that was built 30 years ago, there's no additionality, and also doesn't necessarily green the grid. So think of, for example, not to pick on the Scandinavians, but like Norwegian hydro geo would be of relatively little carbon benefit because also that grid is already very clean. So adding new renewable energy doesn't help very much. So it might be very cheap, but it doesn't really do much for the world. And I think people are starting to realize that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have very, very high quality certificates. So for example, that are clearly additional, that have emissions impact. So for example, you're doing a new project in a very dirty grid, like say Poland, that has a lot of coal, and you're then displacing that coal with your new renewable energy that has a much stronger carbon impact. And in some cases, you have certificates that carry social impact. So there's another company that I advise called Power Trust that does very high social impact projects in the developing world. So there's a spectrum of certificates, and I would just encourage you to kind of be aware of that and make sure that you're going into it with eyes wide open, because a lot of times companies, particularly supply chain companies that have very thin margins, will see the cheapest certificates and their eyes get really wide, and that's all they can think about. And they realize that they don't realize that you kind of get what you pay for. And sometimes they then regret, purchasing those certificates that are not as valuable. So a couple things to add about each of these mechanisms. When you're doing on-site, you can either own the project outright and the equipment outright, or you can do some sort of financing mechanism that's either a lease or a power purchase agreement on-site, where some other company owns the equipment and you're just basically buying the electrons and the certificates from it. And some CFOs like that. Also, now is the time to start considering energy storage for those on-site projects for a whole host of reasons. But the simplest one is the economic benefit of protecting yourself against outages. This was in the news, and it's public that Toshiba Memory, now called Kioxia, has a big factory in Japan, that went offline literally for like 17 minutes, lost electricity for about 17 minutes, but that meant they had to shut the whole factory down for 2 days and reset. They lost about $700 million in value. So keeping the lights on is really valuable for some factories or for some facilities. So keep that in mind. It's worth looking into batteries. For offsite mechanisms, the main one that you'll hear about is power purchase agreements, and that's just a bilateral contract. That's where I say, hey, you wind farm, sell me your electrons and the certificates that go with them for this price. Virtual power purchase agreements are also emerging, and that's very, very common in the US. And that's effectively a hedge product, and it carries some risk, but if things go well, you could actually get paid to take renewable energy. And so, for example, Amazon has done a ton of VPPAs. They really like them. I'll say that those are generally reserved for the very large, very sophisticated buyers. Amazon has, probably more than 100 people on their energy team buying for their data centers. And so, if you're a relatively small company and you hear, "Hey, VPPAs can be a way to have a negative cost for renewable energy," just it's worth looking into. But you need to have high volumes to participate. You need to have 50 megawatts or more of load. And then you also need to be pretty sophisticated to deal with the risk, because in the worst case, you could actually lose a lot of money on them. And then the last piece is utility green programs, which I know are very sophisticated in Europe. I think you all had somebody from Greenpeace Energy on recently. And that can be a great way to go, especially for smaller facilities, because it's just like call up your utility and say, hey, send me green power, and the associated certificates and ability to make claims on that green power. And then finally, certificates. I talked about this a little bit, but I want to call out the distinction between bundled and unbundled RECs. You'll sometimes hear that. And bundled means that you are buying the RECs with the power. So they're coming together in a bundle. It's, RECs meaning renewable energy credits, or GOs. That's coming in a bundle with the electricity. Unbundled means that they are that they're separate. Generally speaking, stakeholders, again, NGOs, government, consider unbundled RECs to be of lower quality. So that's why I refer you toward, REC purchases, or PPAs rather than just simple REC purchases. That said, again, I think it's complicated. I think there's a spectrum of quality. And if you can make the case that, hey, my certificate purchase enabled this project, for example, I made a 5-year forward contract and said, I'm going to buy renewable or buy these certificates for 5 years. That helps the project get built. So generally, stakeholders prefer bundled. They prefer bundled, but I think there are many cases in which unbundled certificates can be valuable. And then again, look out for these high impact products. I think they're really exciting and a great way to make a difference, particularly in the developing world. So a few more slides for y'all, and then I'm going to hand it over to Yasha. You're probably aware that that there are stakeholders who are keeping us all honest. Full disclosure, I worked at one. My first job in my career was at Rainforest Action Network doing corporate campaigns, and then eventually I got into the business side of things because frankly I feel like I can have more impact here. But the Greenpeaces of the world are watching companies, and I think they play a productive role, right? So they're watching to make sure that what we as companies are doing is actually helping. It's not what we'd say, greenwashing, right? So it's worth spending some time thinking about standards. We can't go into all of it here today, but I would just say the high points are, as much as possible, try to go for bundled deals if you can, PPAs or VPPAs. And then if you're buying certificates, think very deeply about the quality of certificates. There was for example, recently a big scandal. There was an article in the New Yorker, an influential US publication, about the company South Pole, which was selling bad carbon certificates. So people are just very, very skeptical of certificates right now. I'm not trying to speak ill of South Pole. I know people who work there, and they do some great work, but I know the leader just resigned, and there are a lot of stakeholders out there looking closely at our purchases. So don't just go for the cheapest option. Try to find the right option. So a few of the things to look out for when you're making these decisions, again, without going into too much depth, is first is additionality. And the simple way to think about additionality is what we call the but-for test. But for my action, would this project have come to be? So can I make a claim that this new renewable energy project would not have happened if I had not invested? Emissionality, I mentioned the example of Poland. Look for places where you can displace the most carbon possible. For example, in the US, we just had an announcement, I think it was Amazon, did a solar project over an abandoned coal mine in a very carbon heavy grid of the US. So look for places where you can displace coal, ideally. Think about geography and time. So depending on where you are, you may want to match your purchases, both, have the purchase be as close to your facility as possible, and also do what's called 24/7, which is buying renewable energy around the clock to support that facility. I'll say the sort of debate around 24/7 is not settled. It's something that Google has pushed really strongly, and I think they have some interesting thoughts around it. It's not a requirement by any means, but it's something to be aware of. And then finally, social impact. Can your project A have a positive social impact, bring jobs, support other development goals? And B, can you make sure your project does not have a negative social impact? And this is important, especially in the developing world. So if you're doing a project, say in the Philippines, you want to make sure that the land was acquired in a legal and ethical way, and that the equipment complies with all human rights standards. So, for example, there's not indication of forced labor in the supply chain of the wind turbines or the solar panels. And it's just worth pointing out that I think something like 60% of the solar panels, the critical core part of solar panels, the polysilicon originates in Western China. So there are a lot of concerns about forced labor there, as well as many of the wind turbines are produced by companies that are based in Xinjiang. So something that we sort of look out for as a baseline, to do no harm with these projects. And that's sort of what I'm getting into here with, increasingly folks are thinking about ESG in procurement. And at a minimum, when you buy renewable energy, putting some sort of ESG language in your contract to say, we want to do no harm with this procurement. We want to make sure that there's not forced labor, that the project land is being treated, in an environmentally friendly way, and the land was sourced appropriately. So just give a little thought to the ESG side in your energy procurement. A couple more slides here, and then I'm going to hand it off to Yasha. We're down to the last two here for me. So when just having a little fun here with images, my daughter loves to draw, and so we spent some time looking for images, and I was like, let's find a really scary three-headed monster. So the main three things that I've run into in my experience when trying to get Scope 3 data and build a Scope 3 program is, starting from the left, resistance to change. Obviously, any supplier doesn't want to ask for, they're already doing a million things. So the first answer is almost always going to be no. And you just have to be used to sort of getting past that. The second is data availability and quality. And I just do not underestimate how hard that is. It's just especially if you're doing it manually, just can be an incredible amount of work. And I've built systems fresh a couple of times, and it's just really painful. So the more you can make it not manual, the better. And then the last piece is cost. And I think on renewable energy, particularly, people overestimate costs. Again, the example of the company that wanted to buy a bunch of rooftop solar. If you're buying renewable energy in an intelligent way, it does not have to be crazy expensive. And in many cases, it has positive economics. Again, back to the example of the PPA that, locks you into a nice same price for a long time and gets you away from that volatility. So try to think creatively about cost. And then, some of the solutions that have been, emerging that I'm really excited about are software oriented. And this is an interesting place where, a famous investor said, I think 20 years ago, software is eating the world. And this is a really exciting, I'm like, please eat the world here, because there's starting to be some really exciting climate related software. So you can do sort of broad scale, whole enterprise climate planning. You can call up Salesforce and they'll deploy their climate suite for you. You can do renewable energy asset analytics. if you have, for example, multiple renewable energy sites, there are all kinds of cool softwares enabling you to monitor and dashboard the health of those facilities. And then finally, the supply chain data piece is really exciting. I think this is an appropriate time for me to hand it over to Yasha, but they're just the supply chain data tools, particularly when it comes to climate, have been scarce for a long time, and so it's just really a welcome development that we're starting to see more of those. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much for your time. It's really been an honor to join y'all, and happy to follow up with folks as they see fit, and love to hear what Yasha has to say.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Josh, so much for the introduction. I think it really just opens up a universe of everything around energy. And there were more questions popping up in the chat. So I invite you very much to also maybe, if you want, pick some of them and answer them. And yeah, otherwise, I also take them later in our discussion in the whole group. But with that, I would also hand over to Yasha. So we have here, when you want to engage your suppliers, you need to know where you start. You need to have data. And if you like, you can start sharing and tell us where to start and how to get active.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks also from my side, Josh. Yeah, happy to now start talking about actually data collection. Yeah, you can see my slides. Perfect. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how actually software can accelerate this process, right? We've heard that especially data collection is an issue. Actually, that's what we are also seeing across industries, across companies, different sizes. Of course, that's one of the motivation for us on why we work on the climate choice, because we want to accelerate that progress to really get climate action in the value chain, make it happen today. What we often see is that that companies start with data collection, be it what Josh mentioned, energy data, but also especially data around we call it climate relevant data or climate specific data. So that could be emission data on company or on product level. It could be we have a question about SBTI in the chat. It could be data about climate target setting, about roadmaps on achieving those targets, and also understanding on what kind of like companies are doing to work on decarbonization, and that includes, as mentioned, energy efficiency measures. However, what we often see is these issues when working with suppliers or gathering data from suppliers. Often there's no comparable data available. So this is a big issue, right? We've just heard on how do we collect, sources or kind of like proof of information on the data that is collected. We often see, questionnaires that are being set up in companies. Then this ends up in having the supplier answer different questionnaires for different customers. It's also kind of like very hard for suppliers because it's often, they have no decarbonization expertise there, and then questionnaires often end up unanswered. There's often no roadmaps for achieving goals, as mentioned, missing emission data, and often no collaborative tools in the process. And we still think, even though the data is often missing, your climate targets in Scope 3 are at risk if your suppliers are not integrated into your strategy and into your process. So we very much advocate to start with this as early as possible, and not wait for the data to be perfect, but rather start today and start where the companies are now, and advocate that they take action to provide you better data and to work on transitioning to renewable energy. Because also no data can be data, right? So reliable data is the basis for collaboration with suppliers. So think of, understanding which of your suppliers are already working on transitioning to renewable energy, understanding this for your procurement categories, so you can actually focus on suppliers that are maybe starting and working on engaging them, and which suppliers are already on track and have resources allocated to work on this. So this also then brings us to the next issue. So if you really want to collect data, even if the data is there's no data yet, right? To start measuring what your supplier base is doing, because without measuring it, you cannot manage it. There's really a lot of issues in companies around data collection as well. So not only the supplier side has a lot of issues, right, with missing data and being overwhelmed with a lot of requests, but also on the companies that need this this tracking or this data collection from their suppliers. So it often involves thousands of suppliers. Sometimes, of course, then like there's some big suppliers, but really like understanding if you want to achieve your climate targets and move towards a low carbon economy, you really need to have every purchasing decisions be informed by data and by information around how well is the supplier on track with their climate targets and what are they doing to actually support your targets in scope 3. Then the data quality, we've already heard, right? Data needs to be documented in order to be audit proof or like available for external auditors. So this needs to, need to be checked, need to be verified. Different data formats, comparability are issues that can start with, in the US we use a comma, and in Europe we use a dot as in our numbers, right? So this then, of course, is very hard if you do this via Excel files, and companies do put in different formats. But then think of like checking hundreds or thousands of proof of documents by yourself and figuring out what can we get in and what is not enough proof basically to use the information. Then as mentioned, like a lot of suppliers don't want to answer any more questionnaires. There's some really like large companies that in general have the policy to not answer to any questionnaires and say, here's our public reporting, find all the information there. But then there's also lack of incentives. So as mentioned, why should a company change? Why should a supplier change? Why should they adopt renewable energy? So it's very important to also think about your strategies on how do you integrate this into your procurement process, and how to do you incentivize suppliers to take action, maybe with bringing more business to them, of course. That's maybe the most obvious one, but also showing or in our experience showing them benchmarks about how they're doing versus other companies, even if they are anonymized, and they can see, okay, other companies have, for example, already started to transitioning to renewable energy. They're in the same sector, and you can see like more and more customers asking for this. This has basically a very big effect, because they can use these benchmarks to then internally get more budgets, get more people on board to actually drive change, because climate and decarbonization becomes business relevant. And I mean, this is like I went already through the issues of this manual process, but just to think about this issue of really just collecting the data, verifying the data, providing suppliers feedback so they change, is really time and costly. So time intense and costly. So we calculated if you would want to do this for let's say 1,000 suppliers, and of course it depends on the amount of data that you collect and the amount of documents you need to check. But you would need at least 4 full-time employees, and even maybe more. But this is a lot of work, and this needs to be done annually. So really, like once you have started to maybe finalize your first data collection, then you want to understand, how did the suppliers improve? How can I make sure, it's not only that like we had the example with the supplier code of conduct. It's not only kind of like signed on a paper, but really then also taking into action, and you can prove that the action was actually done. And this is where software can save a lot of time and cost by automating these processes and workflows and getting the companies on board. And as mentioned, we at the Climate Choice, we're specialized on this, and we're really addressing these key challenges. So really, we automate these processes to engage and track thousands of suppliers. We also verify and check data that gets into our platform, so we make sure it's accessible for external auditors. There's always a feedback loop for suppliers, so we always make sure to tell the supplier, okay, what's in it for you when you provide this information, right? You get information back, you get to get insights, you get best practices recommendation, how to, you know, like improve your own journey, and this with market relevant information, business relevant information. But also, and this is very important, it's very scalable. So we also get the data from public sources. So if companies only provide their sustainability reporting or, you know, publish on their websites what they have done, then we gather this information and turn this into data profiles. And here I have an example of a large company from the US, where we've done this as an example. So we're going typically through thousands of URLs, you know, websites, documents. We identify the documents that are relevant for, you know, climate specific information, also, you know, also energy, renewable energy specific information as well, and a lot of other data points that are, you know, as mentioned, climate related data, and give us an understanding of, you know, how are the suppliers doing today and what are they doing to improve. And out of this, we create then data profiles to then plug in and really use that information instead of collecting it yourself. And with that, we basically kickstart, you know, supplier programs. Lara already mentioned we run a Scope 3 action group that starts again in March next year, where we really, you know, help companies to start this process. And typically, we use public data first, so we really go the way of least resistance, right? So if there's public data, it's great. We don't have to connect, you know, write the suppliers, contact the suppliers, and we can already, you know, use this information. Then we have tools for, you know, like screening information, where we just get high-level information and see, is it, you know, worth it to even go further and ask more granular data from these companies, because they might not have it yet. So we keep the effort low for the suppliers, and then really only, you know, gather really granular information, either for top suppliers or the ones that are further ahead. And that really helps then to, you know, create, you know, scores, but also like provides you the data points on integrating this, you know, information as a decision metric in your procurement processes, to analyze your procurement structure. For example, today, how are suppliers doing on specific, you know, topics, and then, you know, set goals on where do you want to be in the future, and really have a way to measure it, but also to improve your reporting over time with the information. And of course, this saves a lot of cost and time. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. We calculated that's more than 90% of cost saved, and this is really the focus that we have in order to accelerate our transition to a low carbon economy. And yeah, we work with different companies on that, typically with large companies that have a lot of suppliers, need a lot of information, and tracking these suppliers in order to enable a more targeted engagement, and also, you know, improved reporting. And yeah, I think that is my part, and thanks a lot for your attention. And I think like now we can go into the questions that we have.
Yeah, thank you. Therefore, I would invite also Josh back on stage. It's hard to have Yasha and Josh, so I made it the first time make one name out of it. Amazing. So yeah, I saw that Josh was already really active in answering questions, but I would bring them up front as well. So one person said, yeah, Josh, you said first suppliers will always say no. And then the question was, so what is the main motivation point that I should tell them? Like, what is in for the suppliers to share data and take action with me? You're still muted.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I actually need to, because I just typed out a long answer. So let me see if I think it would be helpful to just refer to. I'm not going to just read it to everybody, but I think it would be helpful to refer to it. So, you know, people sometimes say, oh, well, at Apple, it must have been easy because, of course, it's a big company. Everybody, all the suppliers must just do whatever you say. And, you know, I have to be really careful about confidentiality and sharing from what it was like working there, but I'll say like any company has to negotiate with its suppliers. It's always a negotiation. So anytime you ask any supplier for anything, they're going to say, okay, well, what am I going to get for that? So I have throughout my career really worked on refining a set of ways to sort of say, hey, this is us helping, let us kind of help you help yourself, basically. And so, the first one is obviously it's going to be good for the business relationship. You don't have to spend too much time on that, but that sort of at least starts the conversation. The second is that you're going to be facing some compliance reason why you need to be serious about climate, and it's going to happen soon. And so let us help you get there, rather than you have to scramble 2 or 3 years from now to be compliant. Let's just we're here to help you build that muscle. And then the third is just the economics are often better. So I talked about, rooftop solar and power purchase agreements generally are net present value positive, NPV positive investments, and just make clear economic sense. And then finally, there's a great quote from Tim Cook out there. I'll see if I can put it in the chat. But he basically says he was at a Ceres conference, a kind of green business conference, and he said, "Look, this is a critical. Being able to act on climate is a critical just capability for any company in the 21st century. And again, let us help you kind of evolve." So that's generally kind of the message points that we get through. There's a lot more, but I would try to keep it simple.
Yeah. But I love maybe the short one I take out is there's a business case in it, and that convinces typically everyone. And we got that so often in the last years, and Europe became so obvious. Everyone who changed before to renewable and stable energy price had a good investment. And maybe Yasha, I take one question to you. So there was something about science-based targets. You have to therefore engage your suppliers and also support them in changing the energy provider. What's your experience like? Why does it? Maybe not everyone knows. Why is it important for science-based target to reach out to your suppliers? What do you see there for companies? Why does this whole topic of supplier engagement for decarbonization become so important?
I think Josh also answered the question around the double counting issue, but also in terms of science-based targets, just in general, SBTi also requires to set engagement targets or set a supplier engagement targets to get suppliers onto target setting themselves, but also in terms of progress reporting. It's just in general, there's so many reasons on why you need why you need this information, and why you also need to check, the documentation of companies on how did they actually achieve a specific outcome. And I think that helps to have the context there.
Yeah, I think that's something we also saw in our Scope 3 group for this year, that we that a lot of companies, even not the huge ones, but the Mittelstand ones, that they are really now taking it serious and see that the market pressure is so high to set science-based targets. But when you go into it, that you very quickly understand that engaging your supply chain is part of it. So if most of your emissions come from the supply chain, you have to engage your suppliers, you have to see which climate targets they are setting, and you have to engage for getting into actions. Josh, I saw that a lot of people ask, how can we be part of the clean energy procurement Academy, and you shared it's not yet open. Are there any other resources? I think you shared an article. How can people stay in touch with you? What is it they should take away from today's interaction with you?
Yeah,
very short, 1 minute.
Sure. On the Academy, we're really excited about it. I'm really proud of something we've been working on a long time. Unfortunately, it's only open to the companies that are members. But if you are a SEBA member, there are several non-US companies that are SEBA members. So if you are a SEBA member, there's absolutely a way to get involved. I would just say, just stay tuned for 2025. And then in the meantime, check out the resource website, because I think they'll have some great kind of materials to get you started.
Okay, Great. Then what I would take out of it is, that there are different options how to support suppliers. And the first one is to understand yourself which kind of energy makes sense and what you can offer and how you can train your suppliers in that. And that you can build on a data foundation to really then also track how your improvements are happening. That's what I take away. And maybe, Yasha, Josh, both of you, last sentence, what is it you want people to have in their mind if they start now engaging suppliers for energy? Maybe Josh first.
Sure, I would just say get started now. There's no harm in just having those first few calls, and just start small. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get moving, and you'll be amazed at how much impact you can have even in just a year.
Yes, and
Right.
I can just add on it. And I had a quote today. How do you say how few people take a phone in the hand and just call someone. So I think it has a big impact, right? To communicate, to collaborate, to understand what is holding companies, people back. And I think like the Renewable Energy Academy, but also in general groups, also as mentioned, we're running a group. Like we just see collaboration is great. Understanding what are others doing, exchanging, and really start today. I think that's my add-on as well.
Great. So get started, form your group, inform yourself, and then share the knowledge with your suppliers. Thank you so much, both of you, either on the evening or the morning, and most of all, everyone joining. So you are the ones who make it happen in their companies and bring it forward. We are very honored to have you today, and I wish you either a wonderful evening or rest of the day, depending on where you are joining. And I would invite you for our last choice event in that year in the middle of December. You can check it out on our website or in the Slack community. It will be basically a review of that year, what has happened, and we invite people who have also participated in our climate summit. So there were some companies where we want to know what has happened during the year and what were their big learnings and what we have to prepare for next year. So you can stay tuned and then get the wrap from that year already, which is a little bit surprising. But yes, that is it, I would say, for today. And I thank you so much for joining and see you soon. Josh, thanks so much for joining.